Imagine yourself on a cold, stormy night, alone in a train station almost forgotten by time. The lights flicker, creating dancing shadows that seem to whisper your name. The wind howls as if carrying ancient, unsettling secrets. You are about to board a train that will take you not only through desolate landscapes, but also into the darkest corners of your mind. This is the starting point of our story today. Claire, our protagonist, is exactly in this situation. She seeks inspiration for her book, but she will find much more than that. Along the way, the lines between reality and illusion begin to blur. Each passing station, each trail followed, can reveal a new fragment of your own soul. So as you watch, ask yourself, what would you do if your deepest fears started to take shape? Join us on this journey and discover how far you can go before fear takes over. On the platform of an old, dimly lit train station, Claire waits alone. The dim lights flicker intermittently, casting dancing shadows that seem to whisper in the cold night wind. The distant sound of a whistle announces the arrival of the train, an old steam carriage that lets out a low roar as it enters the station, wrapped in a blanket of steam and mystery. Claire, with a mixture of anxiety and determination, adjusts her coat and boards, her footsteps echoing in the silence that surrounds her. She chooses a seat next to a window, looking out as the train begins to move, leaving behind the station that quickly disappears into the fog. Claire's distorted reflection in the window confronts her, blending into the darkness outside. As she tries to lose herself in a book, her words become confused with thoughts of the unknown that awaits her, and for a moment, she questions her decision to isolate herself in that remote cabin to write. As the train cuts through the nightscape, its wheels hitting the tracks in a hypnotic rhythm, Claire finds herself reflected in the window again, confronting the parts of herself she left behind and the parts that are beginning to awaken. The journey becomes a metaphor for his personal quest, facing the insecurities and traumas that have shaped his life. Claire, now in constant motion, prepares for the revelations and redemption she will encounter upon her arrival, while the darkness outside the train promises more than just night. Inside the train, Claire struggles to concentrate on her writing, but the shadows dancing in the carriage windows, distorted and menacing, capture her attention in an unsettling way. The dim lights inside the train oscillate with the movement, creating visual illusions that seem to take on a life of their own. Every creak and creak of the old train resonates like an echo of your own doubts and fears. As she tries to formulate words on paper, the reflections in the windows turn into distorted faces that watch her with blank, accusing eyes. These ominous visions begin to whisper your name, a cacophony of voices that mixes with the incessant rhythm of the wheels on the tracks, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish between the sound of the train and the murmurs that seem to emerge from the depths of your mind. The voices grow in intensity, each call more desperate and personal than the last. Claire, they hiss, why did you run away? The words seem scratched straight from her darkest memories, reliving fragments of a past that Claire has desperately tried to forget. Fighting the growing sense of panic, she curls up in her seat, covering her ears in an attempt to silence the voices. However, the effort is futile. The voices become screams, each charged with accusations and painful memories of betrayals and losses that Claire believed she had buried long ago. With each tunnel the train passes through, darkness engulfs the carriage, and with it comes a new wave of whispers, more intense and disturbing, that not only call her name, but also reveal dark secrets that she feared to face. In this suffocating environment of fear and hallucination, Claire finds herself trapped in a web of her own psyche, where every reflection and shadow transforms into a specter of what she fears most. The line between reality and hallucination disappears completely when, in a moment of absolute terror, she sees a familiar figure sitting in front of her, as real as her racing heartbeat. It's a younger version of herself, staring with eyes full of tears and accusation. "Why did you leave me?" young Claire asks, her voice a distorted echo that overlays the rumble of the train. This ghostly encounter forces Claire to confront the truth of her escape, not from a place, but from herself and the emotional scars that shaped her existence. With each mile traveled, the train not only transports her through the nighttime landscape, but also deeper into an examination of her soul, where the answers she seeks are as disturbing as the journey itself. When the train finally stops with a long squeal, Claire gets off at the small station, which appears like a vague silhouette through the dense fog. The damp, cold air envelopes the platform, making the environment surreal and ethereal. As she steps onto the worn stone floor, a feeling of being watched settles deep down her spine. Streetlights emitting a faint, yellowish glow barely pierce the fog, creating an atmosphere of isolation and exposure. Even with a few other people scattered around the platform, the gazes she feels in her direction seem to come from somewhere beyond sight, as if invisible eyes were fixed on her every movement, analyzing, judging, perhaps even predicting her fate. As Claire slowly walks away from the train, each step resonates ominously in the stillness of the station. The sound of her footsteps on wet stones echoes, seeming to attract more attention from the mist that surrounds her. The feeling of invisible eyes intensifies, and she can almost hear the whisper of voices hidden in the fog, commenting on her arrival, as if the station were a stage and she was the main actress in a play whose plot she doesn't know. The wind brings murmurs that seem to form almost intelligible words, increasing the tension in your nerves. She clutches her belongings to her chest, trying to find some comfort in the little she brought with her, but the feeling of vulnerability only grows as she moves away from the comforting confines of the station. When she finally reaches the trail that leads to the cabin, the fog thickens, as if trying to block her path or perhaps cover up the secrets of the trail she is about to follow. Each step forward is an effort against the resistance of the fog and the growing feeling that she is not alone. The winding path seems to go on forever, and Claire has the impression that figures lurk at the edges of her vision, just waiting for the flickering light to fail before revealing themselves. Even though he knows it could be his imagination, fueled by fear and loneliness, he can't shake the idea that every bush, every tree, can hide an observer, silent and attentive. As she approaches the cabin, the feeling of being followed is as palpable as the cold that penetrates her bones, making her quicken her pace, yearning for any sign of shelter and security that the cabin can offer against the invisible audience that the night seems to have summoned to witness her arrival. After an exhausting walk through the dense fog, Claire finally enters the cabin, closing the door behind her with a sigh of relief. The interior is rustic and smells of old wood and a long-extinguished fireplace. She lights some candles in the fireplace, casting flickering shadows across the walls that only reinforce the feeling of isolation. Tired, Claire drops into one of the worn armchairs, trying to absorb the heat from the gently crackling fire. The strange noises that begin to emerge from the walls and ceiling are unsettling, but she attributes them to the wind whistling through the cracks and the wood adjusting to the cold outside. With each click, she tries to convince herself that she is alone, using logic to push away the fear, as the fatigue of the journey weighs on her shoulders, pulling her eyelids down. However, rest is difficult to achieve. Each shadow seems to move with intent of its own, and the wind seems to whisper secrets through the cracks. Claire curls up tighter in the blanket, seeking comfort in small rituals like making a cup of tea. The sound of water boiling on the stove is mesmerizing, and she concentrates on it to banish the feeling of invisible eyes watching her. Despite her tiredness, every noise makes her jump, and the calm she seeks seems just a distant promise. She walks around the cabin, checking locks and windows, in an attempt to ensure a physical and psychological barrier against the night and its uncertainties. Exhaustion and tension form a knot in her stomach, and she forces herself to sit down again, closing her eyes and taking deep breaths, trying to meditate through the noise of the wind. As the night progresses, Claire's struggle to maintain her composure becomes increasingly arduous. The sound of wood creaking under the influence of the fire mixes with the cracks she can't identify, fueling her already agitated imagination. She gets up and walks to the window, looking out. The fog still covers everything, a veil that separates reality from illusion, and Claire feels as if she is trapped in limbo, between sleep and wakefulness. Her eyes feel heavy, and she allows herself a moment to simply observe the play of light and shadow, finding a strange kind of beauty in the interplay between the candlelight and the darkness outside. Finally, she returns to the armchair, allowing herself to relax to the monotonous, comforting sound of burning wood. Fatigue overcomes her, and for a moment, fear gives way to oblivion, allowing her to sink into a restless but necessary sleep. As the night progresses, the isolation of the cabin and the accumulated fatigue begin to deeply affect Claire's perception. The shadows on the walls seem to move with a sinister autonomy, and the reflections in the windows no longer show the outside world, but rather scenes that seem to come out of a train carriage. Figures dressed in costumes from another era pass through the fogged windows, looking directly at Claire with piercing gazes and melancholic expressions. She blinks several times, trying to clear her vision, but the images only become clearer and more detailed. These train passengers, who seem to carry untold stories with them, begin to murmur among themselves, ignoring the barrier between the real and the imaginary, as if they were discussing their presence there. Perplexed and restless by these apparitions, Claire turns to her diary as a lifeline. She begins to write frantically, describing every detail of the figures and trying to decipher their murmurs. Her hands shake as she writes down every word, every look these specters give her. In her mind, she questions whether these visions are manifestations of her own overworked psyche or whether there is something more supernatural at play in that isolated cabin. Writing becomes a process of discovery and confrontation, where Claire tries to find some meaning or pattern that can explain the inexplicable. Each page of the diary is filled with vivid descriptions that mix reality and hallucination, leaving her exhausted but unable to stop. In an attempt to confront her hallucinations, Claire gets up and approaches the windows, touching the cold glass, half expecting to feel the texture of the passengers' clothes. She whispers questions, hoping for answers that never come, just the echo of her own voice in the empty cabin. The interaction with her visions becomes more intense, and in a moment of disturbing clarity, she realizes that each reflected figure appears to share traits with herself. They are like distorted versions of her own emotions and memories. This revelation brings a mix of terror and fascination, and Claire turns away from the window, taking a deep breath, trying to ground herself in the reality she knows. However, the line between what is real and what is the fruit of her troubled mind continues to blur, leaving her in a state of constant alert and morbid fascination with what the night has yet to reveal. Claire, in a state of increasing agitation, goes down to the cabin's basement looking for something she can use for firewood, but what she finds are dusty boxes full of old train tickets. Each note, yellowed with age, seems to vibrate with tangible emotional energy. As she touches them, long-forgotten memories begin to emerge, each associated with a specific journey she took at pivotal moments in her life. Tickets are not simple travel souvenirs, they are portals to the moments of trauma that Claire tried to bury deep within her mind. Each discovery is like a key that unlocks a door to these painful moments, and the repressed emotions begin to flow with an intensity she can barely bear. With each note she examines, images of these traumas materialize in the dim light of the basement, as if the notes were cinematic projections of these distressing moments. Claire sees herself at different ages and situations, each marked by an episode of loss, betrayal, or fear. She realizes that the passengers she has seen reflect these fragments of her own story, each carrying a piece of her pain and internal struggle. The revelation that these visions are manifestations of her own traumatic experiences causes Claire to feel a mixture of relief and horror. On the one hand, there is the relief of understanding the origin of these hallucinations. On the other, the horror of facing these memories in such a vivid and uncontrollable form. With this new understanding, Claire's mental rebuke intensifies as she struggles to accept and integrate these aspects of her history into her current identity. Each note, each memory, becomes a point of reflection on how these events shaped the woman she became. The cold, damp basement now feels less like a physical space and more like a setting for Claire's internal battle. Tears mix with the dust of the basement as she faces each trauma, trying to recontextualize her pain in hopes of finding some form of peace or resolution. This moment of catharsis, although excruciating, is necessary so that Claire can finally begin to heal the wounds these traumas have left in her soul. Claire, now fully aware of the nature of her visions, faces them with new resolve. In the silence of the cabin, she sits with her diary open, the pages filled with notes about every hallucination, every fragment of memory that has manifested. Recognizing that these visions are reflections of her own traumas, Claire feels a surge of empowerment. Although still disturbing, these apparitions no longer grip her with fear. Instead, she sees them as pieces of a puzzle that, once completed, can offer a clearer picture of herself and her path to healing. She begins writing with renewed intensity, each word not only documenting her experience, but also transforming her trauma into a narrative she can control and ultimately share. This writing process becomes therapeutic for Claire, a way to dialogue with her most painful memories in a constructive way. Each chapter she writes helps her redefine her relationship with the past, transforming the trauma into a testament to her resilience. She finds that as she recounts her experiences, the weight of these traumas begins to lift, allowing her to see herself not as a victim of these events, but as a survivor. The words flow more freely now, and she feels each sentence as an affirmation of her strength and determination to face and overcome her fears. In the end, Claire stands up and walks to the cabin's window, looking outside where the fog begins to dissipate with the first rays of morning sunlight. This new day symbolizes the dawn of a new perspective for Claire, one that accepts the shadows of the past, but also recognizes the light of her own growth and evolution. The cabin, once a place of isolation and fear, now becomes a sanctuary of self-discovery and creation. She knows the road ahead may still be fraught with challenges, but she is now equipped with the strength of her own narrative, ready to face whatever comes with courage and hope. As the first glow of dawn cuts through the fog, Claire walks back to the station. The fresh morning air seems to wash away the last shadows of the night, bringing with it a feeling of renewal and hope. With firm and decisive steps, she crosses the same trail that led her to the cabin, now lit by the soft orange tones of the rising sun. Upon reaching the empty platform, she carefully places the diary on a bench. The book, full of his discoveries and transformations, stands there as an offering to any soul who may seek solace or understanding through his words. Claire feels a mixture of relief and longing to leave part of her journey there, symbolizing the closure of a significant chapter in her life. While waiting for the train, Claire reflects on the intensity of the days spent in the cabin. She no longer sees herself as the tormented woman she arrived at, but as someone who faced her deepest fears and emerged stronger. Observing the horizon, she notices that the world looks different now, as if she is seeing colors and shapes for the first time. As the train approaches, belching smoke and emitting the familiar metallic sound on the tracks, she feels a rush of emotion. Climbing aboard is no longer an act of escape, but a conscious step toward new challenges and possibilities. Claire's determination to move forward is palpable, and she embarks on a journey with a rejuvenated sense of purpose. The train begins to move, and as Claire settles into her seat, the rising sun shines through the windows, bathing everything in gold. She looks back at the season that quickly becomes a distant point in the past, feeling a deep connection to the cycle of nature and the rhythm of life. The trip back promises to be very different from the one that brought Claire to this place. Now, every passing landscape is seen through the eyes of someone who has learned the importance of facing the past and using their history to shape a better future. Claire feels like she's part of something bigger, a plot that continues to unfold with each thump of the train's wheels on the tracks, carrying her forward, ever forward. And so, following Claire's every step and every breath, we witness an extraordinary transformation of a soul tormented by the darkness of her own fears until she reaches the light of self-acceptance and rebirth. On her journey, Claire discovered that the shadows she feared were, in fact, distorted reflections of her own being, pieces of a past that needed to be faced so she could be truly free. And you, did you imagine yourself in her place? Would you, like Claire, have the courage to face the ghosts of your past, transform pain into power, and finally move forward, renewed by the dawn of a new day? This story invites us to reflect on our own traumas and fears, challenging us to confront them and, perhaps, to write our own story of redemption. I hope this journey through the Claire and the Train of Souls script was as revealing for you as it was for our protagonist. Until the next journey, keep exploring, facing, and, above all, transforming. Because each of us has a station to arrive at, a train to board, and a destiny to shape. And now, the question is, what will be your next stop?